I think this expectation that more ranges of motion that are massive are going to save you from injury. And I will tell you firsthand that is not true. I want you to talk to a dancer. I want you to talk to a gymnast, a cheerleader. Talk to anybody who works in a sport where you require very large ranges of motion and ask them how they feel, because it probably hurt. But if you are trying to improve your fitness, give yourself more energy, get stronger, stay out of pain, feel good, I think mobility is a smaller piece of that equation than you might be led to believe in the current fitness industry as it exists right now. Hey everybody, welcome to the Doc Wishloff podcast. I am your host, Dr. Kirsten Wishloff. On today's episode, we're going to be thinking through mobility training. When do we use it? Why do we use it? Why is it so dang gone popular? Let's get into it. It is a big, broad topic. And so I don't want to come down on any systems because ultimately I think movement is productive for your body. So if you are someone who practices movement, who teaches movement, I don't want to discourage creativity or make you feel afraid to do anything. But I think that there are some missing pieces of the puzzle when it comes to increasing someone's range of motion. And I think a lot of the current systems leave some gaps that are important, is what I'll say, and I'll try to touch on today. I would suggest that a lot of what we know is kind of classic mobility training and like stretching and joint expansion was based in a foundation of post-surgical care. And so when we look at the profession of physical therapy and a lot of the rehab protocols or, whatever protocols are in place for joint replacements or ligaments or reattachments of a muscle, when we look at the post-surgical protocols, they were put in place for a reason because there was structural damage at a joint that needed physiological loading and changes so that we expanded the tissue, we taught the tissue to be longer. And so if you look at some of the research, I'll see if I can find some quotes. I am going off the cuff with this, but there's research talking about like casting and locking out joints in certain positions and evidence that the sarcomeres are actually getting longer. So the muscles are actually able to get longer when we do long holds or put things into different positions. A lot of the research that you're going to see is generally surgical in nature, post-surgical protocols. And so I think a lot of what is now known as kind of classic rehab in the physio world is based off of those protocols. And I think sometimes people extrapolate those ideas to performance-based care, which is kind of the world that I live in. When I say performance, I really mean like anything. Performing right now, I'm on podcast. I'm performing a podcast. I need my body to be able to sit here and look at the camera and talk. That's a performance. Running's a performance. Lifting, performing some sort of activity is what I'm going to say as performance. It's not post-surgical care. It is care with the intent of performing some sort of action without pain limiting you. So if we look at the world of performance-based injuries, not structural damage-based injuries, I'm talking the kinds of injuries are like my knee hurts when I run, or I can't lift my arm up over my head and it just kind of started happening. Those types of injuries require a different skill set. And this is where I think people get lost in the mix. I think if you have something that hurts, let's say your knee hurts, you have an IT band syndrome, you look up IT band syndrome, you get rolling for the IT band, you get stretching out of the hip, you get stretching out of the calf or the quad or the hamstring. And we're trying to bring length because the assumption is the pain point is painful because the motion is restricted. What I'm here to explain to you is that most of the time in a performance-based injury, the pain point is moving in excess, meaning too much motion is going there. It hurts because there is too much force going there for what that tissue has strength to manage. So if we go on that thought and then we come back to this idea that we're like mobilizing and stretching and expanding it, although we might be getting temporary symptomatic relief of pain by rubbing the spot or releasing tension, you're ultimately doing yourself a disservice because you are not redistributing that motion to somewhere else that needs to take up more. So in the context of performance-based injuries, mobility can be productive so long as it is targeting the right place. I'll say that one more time for you. Mobility is productive as long as it is targeted an appropriate location. So as long as it is targeting the appropriate location, we can get a really meaningful result out of mobility training. I think defining what a meaningful result is also very important because distortion of perception of pain is something that is very short term. So if you're foam rolling and you're scraping and you're rubbing something that hurts, it's going to feel less painful afterwards. But did we move the peg forward? Are we progressing, or are we just spinning our wheels and trying to get temporary pain relief? If you have been rolling something for more than like a month and it's on one side of your body, not the other, there's a problem. There's a problem, and the rolling is not doing it, and the mobility training's not sorting it out. So reflect on how long you have been using a mobility tool and think to yourself, did this really change anything at all? Because there's a good chance you're probably targeting the wrong problem. We want to take a full body look at what is going on. When we are determining where do we need to apply mobility, there are schools of thought that will isolate joints piece by piece by piece. How is your ankle? How is your knee? How is your hip? All of these joints will move differently if the context of the body position changes. If you turn your torso to the right, your left hip rotation is going to present differently. It's going to look different because of the fascial tension changes through the entirety of the system. So ultimately, isolated ranges of motion don't really give you a hugely clear concept of what's happening in the body. There is an order to which you can assess ranges of motion. We have to start centrally. We have to understand those person's sensory inputs. We have to understand vision and balance and anything happening in their internal organ systems to really understand how motion is being distributed out into the limbs. And so I would suggest that if you are someone who is working with clients to improve their mobility, we have to create a system. We have one, take my posture revival course. You have to create a more structured system to prioritize key areas before you start just going loosely joint by joint by joint. Because I think a huge error in people's decisions to apply mobility is that they start at the site of pain instead of looking at how that movement is collected and organized through the entirety of the system, predominantly centrally, and how that sensory input and foot pressure and visual system is working. So if we don't have context of those central things, we're really going to be chasing random ranges of motion without understanding why those might be in place. A point to further that idea is when we see a range of motion that is restricted on a person, a knee-jerk reaction is to try to increase it. You go, that looks less than that. Let's make more there. My hesitation for you is take one step back, figure out why it might be restricted. Because if your body is trying to help you out and tighten up something that is not stable or that is tight to protect you from something, if we start by unwrapping that or expanding it, you might lead yourself down a rabbit hole you didn't know you were going down. So for me, stability is number one. Mid-range stability is always going to be number one when we're working through any sort of injury. And we're seeing if tone and range changes by adding stability first. We're not going to force an end range. We're not going to hang out in an end range until we understand your capacity to control the mid-range like a boss at different speeds, at different intensities. We want to see that because oftentimes what happens is when we get cleaner at organizing and creating tension in comfortable mid-ranges, those bigger end ranges start to just show up when you need them. Yes, we can expand them depending on your performance goals. If you're like doing jujitsu and you need to roll around on your neck, then yeah, we'll play around with some end ranges, your capacity to control the end range. But if you're a person who does like an F45 class, you got time, you got a certain amount of time to spend your life. And I don't know that rolling around on the ground for 45 minutes, if your goal is feeling better and being more fit, is really serving you. I think sometimes there's like this mantra that like more flexibility, more mobility training is going to save you from injury. I don't know that that's entirely true. I don't know that you can entirely predict injury, but what I do know is that you need to expose your body to incremental load to have it change. Does that necessarily mean you need huge ranges of motion to be pain-free and to live your life? I don't think so. I think you need some motion and we need a foundation and a baseline, but I think this expectation that more ranges of motion that are massive are going to save you from injury, and I will tell you firsthand that is not true. I want you to talk to a dancer. I want you to talk to a gymnast, a cheerleader. Talk to anybody who works in a sport where you require very large ranges of motion and ask them how they feel, because it probably hurt. Because that flexibility, and I know the term mobility is like control within the ranges. They have control. They've got big ranges of motion. They're holding their leg up overhead. That does not prevent injury. That does not prevent injury. If you need those shapes for your performance, then we'll make them happen and we'll give you mobility exercises. But if you are trying to improve your fitness, give yourself more energy, get stronger, stay out of pain, feel good, I think mobility is a smaller piece of that equation than you might be led to believe in the current fitness industry and rehab industry as it exists right now. It's a quick overview of mobility. I don't want to go too crazy into depth on any one of these topics. I'll put it out to you guys. Reach out to me on Instagram. If you listen to this podcast and you're like, I'd really like you to go into more depth on these concepts, let me know because I can. The summary that I will leave you with is figure out why you want more mobility. If pain reduction is that reason that comes to the top of your mind, please make sure that you understand that there are other interventions that have nothing to do with expanding your range of motion that are likely to lead to better outcomes for pain relief and injury prevention than expanding your range of motion. That is a wrap for me. It was awesome having you guys here today. Again, please reach out if you want me to go into more depth on this topic. I would love to. I talk about this stuff all day. If you want to learn how I work through people's injuries, or if you want to get your injuries worked through by me, you can join the waitlist for my Posture Revival program. I would love to have you guys. And again, always reach out. I would love to hear from you. Have an awesome day. Once again.